again with the mic. I did it again. Second time in a row because I pressed the wrong button. Anyhow, let me start this all over again. Shoot me now, please. Freaking embarrassing. But anyway, welcome to this January 8th edition of PuckTalk Montreal. I am, of course, Costa. Super excited and so screwed up when it comes to this shit, right? I told you guys, live shows, I'm famous for keeping the mic off. I'll fix that as I go along, right? I have to mute it when I'm playing the stream coming soon graphic, because otherwise you hear everything that I do in the background. So that's where I get screwed up. I'll find a way to fix that. I promise. Okay. But let's get back to what I was talking about when it comes to the lineups. And we'll go back to the graphic again, right? For the Red Wings, you've got Finney, Larkin, Casper, DeBrincat, Kopp, and Kane, Van Riemsdyk, Comfer, and Raymond, and then Soderblom, Rasmussen, and Appleton up front. On defense, Edmondson and Seider, Sherratt and Sandin Pellikka, Johansson and Bernard Docker, and in goal, it's confirmed already that it's going to be John Gibson for the Detroit Red Wings. He's been hot of late, so great for him, but not so great for the Canadiens. He's really stabilized their net, right? So got to give him a little bit of credit because he got off to a really bad start for Detroit early on this season. Then when you look at the Canadiens lineup, you've got Caulfield, Suzuki, Texier, who's been absolutely en fuego. Slavkovsky, Kapanen, and Demidov, Bolduc, Dano, Gallagher, and then Blais, Valeno, and Beck. Valeno also having a great night on Thursday from a defensive standpoint. On defense, you've got Matheson, Dobson, Hudson, Carrier, and I expect Struble to be out, given the fact that I think Goulie's going to be back in. We don't know who's confirmed as a goaltender. I am absolutely praying that it's Jacob Fowler because I want our best goaltender right now to be between the pipes for Montreal. I know Dobish hasn't played very much, but I really want to see what Fowler can do in call it a high-pressure situation and a big stakes game, right? Because after all, given the fact that Detroit is right behind the Canadiens in the standings, it's really a 4-point game for the Habs. And after Thursday night's win versus the Florida Panthers, they also ended up being, for the time being, number one in the Atlantic Division. We'll see whether or not that holds up with Tampa holding 2 games in hand. But I digress. Then when you take a look at the scratches, for Detroit, not much there. Dries and Hamonic were scratched last game. We'll see whether or not they draw into the lineup. Anderson's got an oblique injury for Montreal, and of course I mentioned Fowler. I want him back in the lineup. And the usual suspects on IR and LTIR, with the exception of Goulie, who may very well end up off the LTIR list if he's cleared to play. Now, on Thursday, he skated prior to the game, and it looked like he was going to play. But I guess he felt something and decided, you know what, maybe I'll wait. And we'll see whether or not he draws into Saturday's game. But he's really close. Engstrom already in Laval, so there's not much that you're going to be able to do there, right? So now, as usual, we're going to go to the part of the show that I always do where I preview the next opponent. Strengths, weaknesses, 5 players to watch on the opponent, Habs 5 players that need to step up, and of course, the keys to victory. And we call that part the 5-point play. And now the 5-point play really is relatively simple. It starts with the Calgary Flames strengths. And when you look at the Calgary Flames strengths, Calgary Flames, wrong. There goes the mouse. Calgary Flames. I swear to God, I actually changed these graphics. Give me a second. I probably pressed cancel like an idiot. Hang tight. I'll get those out of there. Live shows. They're always fun. Here we go. Hang on. I apologize, folks. Give me 2 seconds. Who are we? Bingo there. And let's go. Strengths, weaknesses. There we go. That should be better. So, yeah, happy hour was great, Ben. Okay, so he caught me with that one. That comment's a good one. Anyhow, when you take a look at the team strengths for the Detroit Red Wings, right, you've got a lot of high-end talent when it comes to their core, right? One thing that I heard that may happen, may not happen, is that Patrick Kane may very well not be in the lineup tomorrow. He's probably going to be day to day. It wasn't listed on the injury front, but that's what I've heard. He may very well end up not playing in tomorrow's game. But Detroit boosts a very potent group of offensive guys when you take a look at Kane and you take a look at Larkin. There are a lot of guys in their lineup that really can't put the puck in the net. DeBrincat, another one. A guy who the Habs could have had in the draft, but didn't. Another mistake. But anyway, I digress there. But their ability to generate scoring chances and their power play production really keeps the Red Wings competitive game to game, right? And so the Canadiens are going to have to be mindful of that. Their goalie is going to be No Channel HQI. I love that name, by the way. He says that he asked who's going to be their goalie tomorrow. It's going to be John Gibson. So no problems there, right? Give me a second as I do one last thing. Sorry about that again, gang. This should have been done, but it wasn't. There we go. And so, as I was saying, their offense is going to be really potent. Then you look at their possession matrix, and they are absolutely elite. They are a possession team. There you go. Ben mentioning exactly what I'm about to talk about, right? The Red Wings rank among the league's leaders in possession numbers. They don't dump the puck in. And this goes back to them playing a style of play that was incorporated by Scotty Bowman back in the 90s when they were so successful. Trap in the neutral zone, use the left wing lock, and then possess the puck as you came across the line, whether it was Datsuk, Fedorov, Yzerman, you name it. They didn't dump the puck in. They were good enough and skilled enough to be able to maintain possession and bring it onto the offensive zone. They control the puck and they dictate play, which forces the defense to be a little bit more aggressive and a little bit less comfortable than they normally are. And for a team like Montreal that plays a man-to-man defense, a team that possesses a puck can really create havoc man-to-man. Then you've got their veteran leadership and playmaking. I mentioned Patrick Kane, future Hall of Famer, great player. You've got DeBrincat, who's another guy who is still relatively young, but is considered a vet. On defense, Ben Sherrod is a guy who really brings a lot to the table as far as veteran leadership is concerned. Patrick Kane, approaching another milestone, which is great for him. And so Detroit really benefits from not only the top tier playmaking of their veterans, but also their leadership, which is something that was sorely missing in the last couple of years, right? Which is part of the reason why I think Detroit really, they suffered over the last couple of years. They had the skill, they just didn't have the cohesiveness. That's the word I was looking for, and the cohesiveness is actually there now. You take a look, as I mentioned, John Gibson really playing well in goal. Well, there's another point, their improved goaltending. Gibson started the season off really poorly. Whether it was just bad habits that developed as he was leaving the Anaheim Ducks, or whether it was just a change in the defensive structure for the Red Wings, he's playing better. He's got his save percentage right now up around 898, and it was at 875 to start the season. So really a nice progression for him as the season continues. We'll see whether or not that holds up in the game tomorrow, because he has historically had problems playing against the Canadiens at the Bell Center. So we'll see whether or not that translates. And one of the other strengths that Detroit has that people forget is the depth of their prospects. Detroit has always been, from the time that Ken Holland was the GM there, they have always been a team that have built through the draft, have been patient with players in the lower levels, the AHL, the ECHL, whatever it might be, and they've taken their time developing. Guys like Henrik Zetterberg back in the day played, I think, 4 seasons in the AHL before he came up to the National Hockey League. And that was true of a lot of different talent that Detroit created on their own through the years. So that being said, Detroit has rebuilt that coffer of talent in the minors, and it's starting to show now. Whether or not that's going to continue as they, guys come up to the NHL and progress to the professional ranks, it remains to be seen. But I really, really think that Detroit's like Montreal, has really gotten to the tail end of their rebuild. Still a little ways to go, but over the hump, ready to get to the point where they're going to be perennial contenders. And Detroit is being built to be a perennial contender. So good on Steve Yzerman. It's been a tough road for him as GM, but he's starting to get there. Then when it comes to the weaknesses of the Detroit Red Wings, what have we got? Well, their team defense and their capacity to give up high danger chances is really the toughest part of their game. They are notorious for not covering the slot. Detroit's defense has always, and I mean always, been structured around playing well around the perimeter and angling guys outside the dots, right? That was the whole premise behind the way the left wing lock used to work. Funnel the guys over to the boards, angle them out, take the puck, regroup, and attack again. Well, they're playing that same way, and because of that, the middle of the ice is vulnerable in the defensive zone. So that if they can't stop guys along the half wall, they tend to give up a lot of chances in the slot. And of course, of late, that has been the Montreal Canadiens' bread and butter. They are scoring from between the hash marks more often than not. So this particular weakness really falls into the Montreal Canadiens' wheelhouse. Then you've got their penalty kill. Right, their penalty kill is nowhere near as good as it used to be. Right, they are missing a lot of defensive-minded players on the Red Wings. They're building through talent, right? And the thing is that unlike Montreal is a team that is developing 200-foot players. So that's the argument that everybody had with Patrick Laine early on in the season. You watch Alexander Texier, and as he goes through the motions, he's starting to develop a better defensive game and playing a more complete 200-foot game, as are other players in the Canadiens. Much more complete on that end for Montreal. That is where they suffer in Detroit, and it hurts their penalty kill badly. So they have to worry about not taking penalties in the hockey game, being on the right side of the puck, and just, their penalty kill has been very weak recently. So the Canadiens can really exploit that. Then another problem for Detroit is a lack of depth scoring altogether. Once you get past the top two lines 3 and 4 don't really produce much. And that's something that we saw here in Montreal earlier in the season, right? To the point where even the second line wasn't producing at certain points of the season, right? Alex Newhook, of course, before his injury was white hot, but it was all about the first line of Suzuki, Caulfield, and Slafkovsky. Well, the Canadiens are now starting to see secondary scoring coming from other lines. Gallagher scoring the other night, just to give an example, right? Philip Deneau getting involved offensively, although he hasn't scored yet. It seems to be coming. His game is starting to get more rounded, and it's starting to really bear fruit. Veleno is starting to make moves offensively. He's probably going to pot one sooner rather than later. Zach Bolduc is due to score, so these things are coming from Montreal. That is something that you don't see from Detroit from their bottom six. Then there's a little bit of roster uncertainty when it comes to Detroit, right? And the role of their young players. While their players are skilled, they really don't know what their function is on the ice, right? There's questions about where they fit vis-a-vis, the defensive pairings and where they are up and down the top six, forward line combinations and how they're supposed to play with each other. They really haven't built any chemistry yet. Again, they're young, but they're getting there. Under the leadership of Patrick Kane and Dylan Larkin and Alex DeBrincat, they're going to get there slowly but surely. But stuff like that takes time. We saw how long it took in Montreal for that chemistry to build and for that camaraderie to build, and I'll talk about it a little bit later in the show. But overall, Detroit is really struggling on that point. And then they have a real problem on the left side of their defense. Ben Sherratt, a little long in the tooth, and their left side defense is relatively weak vis-a-vis the right side. So it's an area Montreal can really attack and exploit, right? Ben Sherratt is nowhere near the defenseman he used to be. He's not as mobile. He wasn't that mobile to begin with, but he's not as mobile as he used to be. So it's an area where if Montreal can get by his check along the boards and cut towards the middle of the ice, they'll get the best of him. And if they get to the middle of the ice and get to that slotted area that they always get to, well, guess what? More likely than not, the Montreal Canadiens are going to score. Now, let's take a look at 5 Red Wings that the Montreal Canadiens need to watch. Obviously, you've got Lucas Raymond, who's among the best young players in the National Hockey League. He is Detroit's top offensive catalyst and current point leader. So dangerous at both even strengths and on the power play. Raymond is somebody they absolutely have to watch. I mentioned DeBrincat. DeBrincat always dangerous, especially against Montreal, right? Even when Alex DeBrincat was with Chicago, he always wreaked havoc versus the Habs. And of course, there is the captain, Dylan Larkin. I don't need to say much about him. He's a playmaking center and their emotional leader, pivotal at both ends on the ice, both offensively and defensively. You got Moritz Seider, their top defenseman who plays from the back end and quarterbacks their power play. He's going to be key and somebody that the Canadiens need to pressure to force him to make mistakes. And then there's Marco Kasper, an emerging young center with speed and creativity. Last time Montreal played Detroit, he scored a beautiful goal versus the Habs, and he's capable of influencing momentum shifts, which is something that he did in that last game. Then you take a look at the Canadiens that need to step up and stand out. And it starts obviously with the captain, Nick Suzuki, and Cole Caulfield. Both those guys have to produce. Yes, because of what Texier did the last couple of games, they've been prevalent in the scoring, right, for the Canadiens. But they've got to get on the board themselves. Suzuki needs to score more goals. He hasn't scored that many this season. I think he's upwards of 14 or 15 for the season. And Caulfield has been scoring in waves. He scores a couple, then lulls, couple, lull. As opposed to the beginning of the season, of course, when Slavkovsky was on the right wing, and he was a little bit more offensively productive in the way he was scoring goals. Then, of course, there's Lane Hudson. Against a team like Detroit, Lane Hudson's dynamic offense is going to be key to the Montreal Canadiens' success. It can't be, all about Lane Hudson, though. There's also the fact that you've got Noah Dobson playing very well. He's on my list as well. And Mike Matheson is always a game changer. Then, of course, you've got Ivan Demidov, who, if his stick didn't break, he'd be at 20 goals. Let me just put it that way. He's been awesome offensively, making the right plays, right reads on the power play, trying to get shots off, and boop, the twig snaps. So I'm hoping that stops and he starts potting a few behind goaltenders, because his one-timer is something to behold. And right now, the stick breaking is taking that tool away from him. And as you can see at the bottom, I put an honorable mention for Caden Gooley. If Caden Gooley gets into the lineup, it's going to be a huge boost defensively for the Montreal Canadiens. I've talked about how Alexander Carrier has played too many minutes. I've talked about how, Arbor Xhekaj has emerged a little bit in the absence of Gooley, especially lately. So getting Gooley back, although he probably won't be in there for 20 minutes to start, getting Gooley back is going to be a huge part of the Canadian success from here to the end of the season. He needs to get his feet wet. He needs to get himself back into the lineup, start feeling that physicality, and get back to what he does best. Because after all, Caden Gooley, when healthy, is the Canadiens' best two-way defenseman, bar none. Now, the next thing, of course, and the last thing, is Artista victory versus Detroit, right? My favorite thing. Number one, the Canadiens need to win the neutral zone battle. Not just up and down the ice between the dots, but they need to make sure they keep themselves there. Because as I mentioned, Detroit is the type of team that defends in angling guys towards the boards, taking them out, getting possession of the puck, and moving the puck up the other way. You got to make sure you pressure Detroit's defense below the dots, right? Detroit, they've got an aggressive forecheck, right, when it comes to their offense. So it exposes their depth defensively. Again, like I mentioned, guys like Sherratt are not that fleet of foot anymore. So sustained offensive time and puck retrievals in the offensive zone for the Canadiens will force Detroit to defend more than they're comfortable with. And that'll lead to more scoring opportunities. You got to get John Gibson busy early. The busier he is, the more likely you are to score. Right? In the last game that Gibson started, he got pulled in that game, right? But Gibson started and the Canadiens pummeled him early, and he allowed, I forget if it was 3 or 4 in the first period that led to him being pulled. But at the end of the day, Gibson's the type of guy who doesn't like quantity early in a hockey game. He likes to get settled in, right? That is something the Canadiens have to avoid. Don't keep the game too simple. Get in there, get shots, get secondary chances, flush to the goaltender, make him work. Canadiens have to stay disciplined. The fact that Detroit's power play is so potent Montreal has to make sure they stay out of the penalty box. They've done a really good job of that the last couple of games, just taking a couple of minor penalties here and there. But overall, against a team with the speed of Detroit, sometimes the Canadiens get caught, especially in the defensive zone, they get caught chasing. And when you get caught chasing, you end up on the wrong side of the puck, as I always say, and you end up taking more penalties than you like. And finally, the first 10 minutes, you're going to need to be strong, not only from an offensive perspective, but a defensive perspective. The Canadiens need an early push because if anything, that early push is going to take away what the Detroit Red Wings can do from an offensive perspective. Canadiens need to establish some physicality because both these teams are not overly large. And they need to make sure they get the crowd in the game, right? We saw how much energy the crowd gave to the Canadiens on Wednesday and Thursday. That needs to continue. So there's your preview, your 5 points, your game day lineups, or projected game day lineups. Obviously, they're never perfect because nobody knows what the hell's going on until the last minute. But comment about what you think when it comes to the preview, strengths and weaknesses. Is there something that we missed, right, that you think might be a big part of the game plan for the Montreal Canadiens? There's no problem in doing that. I welcome it, right, because obviously I'm not Mr. Perfect, right? I do make mistakes, as you can see from the beginning of this show. Now, I started another little segment here to talk about what's going on with the Montreal Canadiens, especially for the live shows, because we never really get a chance in season because of the compressed schedule to talk about the nitty-gritty when it comes to Montreal, when it comes to trades, when it comes to anything. So I call this segment the Bell Center Buzz. I didn't have much of a better name to call it, so I mean, that's pretty much it. So the Bell Center Buzz is pretty much what's going on right now around the Montreal Canadiens and the stuff that we should talk about, right? And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is all these trade rumors, especially surrounding Blake Coleman. I brought this up before, and while you're hearing these rumors, and Blake Coleman would be the type of guy who would be a good addition for Montreal, right? Because he's really good on both sides of the puck. But he is a guy who's a little bit older. So when you take a look at Montreal, right, and I know a lot of you are going to say, well, they need some veteran leadership. As I've said in previous shows, they have it. Where? In our young veterans. In Suzuki, Caulfield, Slafkovsky is a young vet. It's his third or fourth season in the league now. I'm losing count. You know, Suzuki's been with the Canadiens since 2021. It's his fifth season, for crying out loud. So how much more do you want for a guy to become a veteran? Does he have to play 10 years? No. A veteran, to me anyway, is a guy who plays in the lineup on a daily basis, plays significant minutes, and influences the team around him. Obviously, a guy like Nick Suzuki, who's the captain of the team and has everybody's ear in the locker room, is a guy that, you know, he's a veteran. Cole Caulfield, yes, he looks like he's a child, but he's not. So, you know, he's another guy who's been with the team. He joined the team in 2021 for that playoff run from the University of Wisconsin. So, like, again, another guy who's been with the team almost 5 years. They're all young veterans. So to turn around and say, oh, we need more veterans on the team, it's garbage. And here's the biggest part of that whole garbage thing, is that when you go out and you get these veterans, that costs you more money than, say, a kid that you're developing and you can sign for 8 years for a team-friendly discount of $5.8 million or whatever it is, right? Which was the case with both Caulfield and Suzuki. I mean, then you have opportunity to build a competitive window. If I'm going to go out and I'm going to start doing what Marc Bergevin did and try to get, you know, guys that have term on their contract so I can get veterans into the lineup, what's the point? I've already got guys that I can conceive to be veterans, right? That lead by example, but lead by what they say. If you listen to Suzuki talk, you can see how eloquent he is. You listen to Mike Matheson on the back end. Now, Mike is a little bit older, obviously, but Mike Matheson, a leader on this team, right? So why am I going to go out and try to find other veterans to bring into a locker room that right now has probably the best chemistry in the National Hockey League? And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But why am I going to do that? So the question is, do you want to bring Coleman in here, right? For that very reason. You don't really need the vet. And you don't really need to bring somebody in that might, you know, jam the gears in the locker room. So I don't understand the idea behind it. I know that Coleman is a good, intense player. a guy that's physical, a guy that can, in the playoffs can be a real contributor. I get it. But are we really ready to be Stanley Cup contenders to have to go out and get Coleman? Or can we wait another season? And we'll go over some of this when we get to the chat portion of the show. But I mean, let me know what you think, because honestly, I'm not interested in Coleman. Next up, the curious case of Kirby Dach. Now, here's the fun part about Dach, right? Kirby Dach broke his foot on blocking a shot, right? And that's why he's been out of the lineup. But that was supposed to be 4 to 6 weeks. We've gone well beyond that point for Kirby Dach. So what's the holdup? Did he hurt himself again? We don't know if he hurt his knee again. But apparently the broken foot is on the same leg as the knee issues, right? I don't see how that can slow you down. It's a broken foot. While it's on the same leg, what are you worried about putting undue pressure on the knee because the foot can't take as strong a push off? I get that part. It's okay to be prudent when it comes to Kirby Dach, right? When it comes to, waiting for him to be absolutely 100% healthy before you get him back into the lineup. And he is skating, so I mean that's a plus, obviously. But the one thing about Dach that I worry about more than anything else is, come playoff time, will he be able to go? Will he be able to find the game that he had early on in the season? Because you have to admit, when he started the season, he looked good out there. He was contributing offensively, good in the defensive zone. There was nothing that Kirby Dach's game didn't need other than the fact that, hey, his face-off percentage was still low, and even that was getting better. So what do you do with Kirby Dach? He's a guy that always ends up with a long-term injury. It's 3 seasons running now that he's had situations where, the last 2, he missed the entire season. Well, last year he was out in February, but this year, out in early November, broken foot, should be back, isn't yet. So what do you do with Kirby Dach? Honestly, when he got dealt for at the draft, I was happy because he was a kid that had a lot of upside, right? And he was just coming off of ZLC. So really, nobody really knew what his injury situation was. But then you ask yourself, why does he get injured so often? Something like this, when it comes to a knee, when it comes to a broken foot, it's not something that you could work out for. Like something that you could prevent through, good exercise, physical activity or whatever. It's a broken foot. Your knee is a joint. You can't protect your knee. There's nothing there to protect it other than a shin guard, right? And obviously when you're skating on ice, on a blade that's, less than a 1/4 inch thick, I mean, obviously, you put yourself in jeopardy every time you hit the ice. So I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, honestly. Next up, we've got the midseason report from Kent Hughes and the question about the team's identity. Now, Paul Maurice came out the other day prior to the game versus the Canadiens on Thursday, and he said that Florida has a hard time playing Montreal because Montreal is a team in flux and they're always changing and they really don't know how to play against the Canadiens. There's a term for what Paul Maurice said. It's called bullshit, okay? Any team can beat any other team if you see what the team's identity is. What's the Canadiens' identity? They're a fast-paced team that uses the middle of the ice well, passes very well east-west, and doesn't like physicality. When you start getting physical versus Montreal, they tend to crumple a little bit. Everybody knows that in the National Hockey League. Although, because of their speed, it is hard to catch up to them. And even though they're a smaller team, the smaller guys are relatively tough enough to be able to break through checks and not worry about the physicality of the game of hockey, right? Guys like Cole Caulfield, Lane Hudson, Brendan Gallagher, to name a few. Alex Newhook's another one. So I get where Paul Maurice says, they really have a tough time playing against Montreal. What I don't get is we don't know how to play versus Montreal. Paul Maurice has been a coach in the National Hockey League for over 20 years, probably closer to 25, maybe more. And so when you look at that and you hear that comment, I don't know how to play versus Montreal. What? I mean, it's a little bit of a misnomer, right? And then when you take a look at what Kent Hughes said in his press conference, right? The fact that they're exceeding expectations this year. And sorry, this guy always said that the Canadiens were going to be in tension for the division title. from the beginning of the year in the summer. Go back and look. Okay. The impact that younger players have had on this team, unexpected impact, right? The acquisitions the Canadiens made when it comes to going out and getting a guy like Texier in the offseason, getting Zach Baldzuk, getting Sammy Blais. I mean, even the signing of Joe Veleno. How important is that now, given his contribution on the defensive side of the game? All those things, right, it all falls into the Canadiens' identity. And Kent Hughes, as he said, the team is always in flux. And the identity is not going to change, though, because they want to be the type of team that's quick. They want to be the type of team that really works hard. And they want to be the type of team that is really hard to play against. Not necessarily from a physical perspective, more from a skills perspective. And that's fine. But you've got to find that harmony, that balance, right? But the Canadiens' identity right now is really simple, right? They're a fast-paced team, a young, fast-paced team who excels in transition and has a very potent power play. It hasn't scored of late, but it produces scoring chances. And that's all you can ask from a power play. When you get your chances and the goalie makes saves, there's not much you can do there, right? But they're generating quality chances on the power play. They're getting good looks. They're firing shots on goal. They're just not going in right now. But they will. Because this isn't the power play that we saw a few years back under Alex Burrows that would pass the puck along the perimeter and wait for the absolute perfect shot. They're starting to release the puck. Earlier this season, they didn't, and it showed. But as they started to shoot the puck, including Lane Hudson, those percentages came up, and the team's power play started looking better. But that's your identity. A fast-paced team that works really well in transition, cuts through the neutral zone really quick, controls the middle of the ice, and plays a very aggressive man-to-man in their own zone. So, Paul Maurice, how do you beat a team like that? It's called doing your homework. It's called looking at video and figuring out the best way to be able to beat the Montreal Canadiens. But no, it's not that the Canadiens don't have an identity. They do. And there was a question that came up during in the comments of one of the shows recently about team chemistry and how important it is, right? And I could go in depth for hours on how important team chemistry is. Because if there's one thing you want to avoid on a hockey team, doesn't matter what level you're at, it's cliques, right? Where you've got the defenseman is one clique, maybe you have the defensive forwards as another, the offensive forwards as another, and you have three different groups looking to see who's got more important on the hockey team, right? And sometimes we even have the goaltenders fall into that. Right now, the Montreal Canadiens don't have that. There's a cohesiveness in this locker room, a camaraderie, a love, for lack of a better term, that you don't see often in the National Hockey League. If you saw the video of Alex Texier going back into the locker room after he scored his hat trick last night, I mean, the love, the happiness, you know, the fact that they didn't want to give him they didn't want Montembeault to take the Wolf's head, they wanted him to keep it again. I mean, that just goes to show you the appreciation for what they have on their team and the love they have for each other. The guys came in and they started hugging him and grabbing him and really showing him just how much and how happy they are for his success. You don't see that on every team. Because on other teams, Toronto Maple Leafs, sorry, I had to clear my throat. You see players that are out there that play on more individual game. You see cliques, the Marner clique versus the Austin Matthews clique. And it breaks the team apart versus the John Tavares clique. And what happens? No cohesiveness, no team play, hence no team. Montreal right now does not have that issue. Credit to Marty St. Louis for being an absolutely great communicator. Trevor Letowski and Stéphane Robida, they need credit for that as well. So does Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton, because when you watch everything that the Canadiens do, whether it's drafting, whether it's acquiring players through trade, free agency, whatever the case is, one thing that you see them emphasize more than anything else is that they have their team psychologists there and they emphasize character. It's a big word for a lot of teams in the National Hockey League and other leagues as well. When you look at junior teams and whatever, and the question about why junior hockey is failing in Canada right now, and I'm not just basing that on the World Juniors, by the way. It's a global issue when it comes to Canadian hockey. All the lower levels all having the same issue. The problem is that teams are selecting players based on their skill and not who they are up here. And if a player doesn't know who he is up here, that affects his skill. It affects his puck distribution. It affects his ability to be on the right side for the right reasons. Meaning that, is he going to play his best or is he going to play a half-ass style of game? All those things come together when it comes to that kind of stuff. The Canadiens' identity and chemistry is clear. And so for that matter, we're going to push this part aside and say to ourselves, you know what? The Canadiens brass has done a good job of putting together a group of guys who are not only teammates, but they're actually friends. And when you have a group like that are more like family than they are a team, there's no way they're going to fail. Now, finally, the last part of the Bell Center buzz is the goaltending situation. And, there have been comments in the chat that have flown by, and of course, I'm going to get to the chat in a minute. But you take a look at the three-man rotation right now between Dobish, Montembeault, and Fowler. And a lot of people are saying, well, this can't stay. Who deserves to stay? Who deserves to start? Who deserves to be the starter going into the playoffs? Well, that decision is going to be made sooner rather than later. Honestly, from my perspective, I think that the Montreal Canadiens are going to wait until after the Olympic break as they approach the trade deadline to really make a decision. And a lot of you out there are thinking, yeah, the odd man out here is Jakub Dobish. You may very well be right. But to me, the odd man out right now, who has more value than a Jakub Dobish, is Sam Montembeault. Because here's the worry I have, okay? And this goes beyond Eric Raymond and Marco Marciano, who's done a great job working with Sam Montembeault, finding his game and getting it back and reworking his fundamentals. But the thing I worry about with Montembeault is whether or not it can happen again, right? He may have his game back right now. Can he sustain it? It's a big question, right? Because we've seen the ebbs and flows of his game last season. This year, even in the preseason, you could see that he just wasn't himself. And when you try to put your finger on the reasons behind it, there isn't very much there, right? You can't really pinpoint why Sam Montembeault got out to the start that he did. So as a team that's looking to be a perennial Stanley Cup contender, how do you trust a goaltender like that? And I want honest answers, right? I'm not trying to be a shit here and get on Montembeault. He's played 3 straight very good hockey games as far as I'm concerned. So flowers on that end, but long term, when you're looking at the Canadiens and their success moving forward, Montembeault's got another year on his contract at $3.25 million. Fowler's on his ELC. He's only played 14 American Hockey League games. Jakub Dobish, he's in his rookie season as well. What's the deal? Are you going to really keep Montembeault and put Dobish back down? It could destroy Dobish's confidence. Or are you going to move Montembeault? Fowler's not going anywhere. I hate to tell everybody. He's not going anywhere. He's staying where he is. He's the least likely of the 3 to go down to the American Hockey League, bar none. So my question to you is this. Who do you keep? How do you keep them? And who do you get rid of? Do you send somebody to the American Hockey League or do you make a trade? I honestly think that the Canadiens are looking to make a trade. It may not be out there. There's nothing in anything that I've heard from any of my own sources or anybody that I affiliate with that gives that where they've told me that this is happening. But I am very, very, a lot of times I'm very intuitive, right? I'm going to give myself a little bit of credit because I see things before they happen. I'm under the impression that right now the Canadiens are hoping Montembeault gets his game back so they can move him before the deadline. I could be wrong, but that's the way I'm seeing it right now. Let me know what you think. So there's the Bell Center buzz for this week, and we'll keep that segment going, and I swear to God I'll get better at getting everything organized because holy shit, I didn't even realize I messed that up. Now, let's get to my favorite part of the show, and that's the chat. And I'll start with early on where everybody's telling me my mic is muted. Thanks for that. There we go. Hey, coach, no channel. I love it. New mic would cost an arm. This is a new mic. Ben. It was a Christmas gift. Like, seriously? It's not the same mic. The old mic is right here. This is the one I was using all year. This one's new. It's not the mic. It's my intro. And the fact that I got to mute myself for 5 minutes. That's the problem for the live shows. I will fix it. I swear to God. I promise. For next show, I'll do it better. Corville G1, thank you very much. Great job and commentary as usual. No channel. I'm a bit nervous when it comes to too many options. I adore our top two lines. Is there any way we could shuffle people coming in to the bottom? It's like if it's working, don't fix it. You know what? I agree with that, right? But then again, it's not always working. It's working right now. As I mentioned before, Alexander Texier wasn't really doing the work earlier on, but you're starting to see him become more comfortable. He's starting to learn to be a little bit more physical along the half wall. And obviously, with 6 points in 2 games, you can't really say that he's not contributing offensively right now. So I'm going to pull back on that. The top 6 is doing well. The bottom 6 is doing well also. In the sense that the bottom 6, right, they don't necessarily have to produce points. If we get goals from the bottom 6, that's great. But your bottom 6 is missing Josh Anderson. Your bottom 6 is missing Jake Evans. Your top 6 is still missing Line and Newhook, as is the bottom 6. So as players get healthy and come back, there's a lot of pluses coming to this lineup. And so there should be a lot more production. Could you imagine if Alex Newhook comes back to the lineup and ends up on the third line? Or Patrick Laine, for that matter? Just think about that for a minute, right? Owen Beck goes down to the AHL. He's played very well, by the way. And he makes room for Patrick Laine. Laine comes back, plays well in his defensive zone, and starts scoring goals. How does that sound, Habs fans? To me, that sounds great. And so I'm not nervous about anything. Let's keep going here. I don't know what Ben means by the Red Wings are a classier club. If you want to elaborate on that one, because I really don't get that. Swear to Fowler. Oh, wow. Yes, I swear to Fowler. I want Fowler to be the starter. He's the goalie of the future for the Montreal Canadiens, right? But when you have a logjam in goal like we have right now, obviously they're going to try to give minutes to everybody, especially Fowler. There's one thing you don't want is for Fowler to be sitting on his ass for more than 2 games in a row. Even 2 games in a row is a lot for him. But with the compressed schedule, I'm not surprised. Let's see. Time to send Dobish to Laval to get playing time. Needs to touch up his game like Monty went through. I'm not going to say, Terry, that it's like Monty went through, because unlike Monty, Dobish hasn't lost his game. Does he have happy feet in net? Absolutely. Is he a little too fidgety for my liking? Yes. I'd like to see him go down and work with Marco Marciano. I'd like to see Marciano get him to calm down, focus on his technique more than, just being in the right angle, right position. And so if Marciano would be able to settle him down and get him to stop being so fidgety in net, then I think it'd go a long way to have Dobish as the number 2 in Montreal. He's done a fine job, don't get me wrong. He's played better than Sam Montembeault up until this point of the season. So I don't know why everybody's hating on him so bad. Has he made mistakes? Absolutely. He did the same thing last year. But keep in mind, if it wasn't for Dobish last season, the Canadiens would have never made the playoffs. Because he came in, he started 5-0, and he pretty much saved the Canadiens' bacon, including in the playoffs versus Washington, when Montembeault went down, he played well in goal. So, you got to send some flowers to the guy for the situation that he was put in. Now, long-term, is that where he's going to be? No. He's going to be the number 2 goaltender. And Sam Montembeault, long-term, I really don't see him with Montreal. That's just me, right? But you take a look at it. When you've got Kakinen in the minors too, right? Capo Kakinen. And he's been playing well for Laval. So the Canadiens organization has 4 goaltenders that are capable right now. Now, Kakinen, of course, hasn't been able to make it translate to the National Hockey League. That's understandable. But the focus to me, again, is the fact that Marco Marciano works with the guys in the American Hockey League, and every time he gets his grubs into a goaltender, they start playing better. Then they come to the NHL, they work with Eric Raymond, and it all goes to hell. Understand where I'm going with this? As usual. Time to trade Monty to St. Louis. Ace, I don't know where you heard that, but I've heard the same thing. The other night, I don't know if you guys saw this. I'm sure you did, because we're all really smart hockey fans and we love it when there's drama elsewhere. Jim Montgomery, the coach of the St. Louis Blues, tried to pull Binnington. And Binnington said, no, I'm not coming. And Hoffer, who was the backup for that game, was hiding in the hallway. And they couldn't find him. So Binnington had to stay in goal. And now, Jim Montgomery kind of, he wrote it off and he laughed it off after the game. But I got to tell you, from what I'm hearing, the relationship between Jim Montgomery and Jordan Binnington has gone to complete hell. Binnington's done. He wants out. There's no two ways about it. And St. Louis is looking for a deal to get him out of there. But the question I have is this. If you do trade Monty to St. Louis for somebody like Jordan Binnington, do you really want to bring Binnington's drama into the Canadiens locker room? It's a legitimate question, right? Because of the fact that the Montreal Canadiens room is so tight right now and the guys get along so well, do you really want to throw the ultimate monkey wrench into all of that? I mean, I get it. Binnington is a proven commodity. What he did last year at the Four Nations for Canada, absolutely fantastic, right? But he's also a hit or miss type of goaltender that runs hot and cold. I would rather have consistency between the pipes, wouldn't you? So I don't know if I'm really interested in dealing Monty for Binnington. I may very well just want to ride out Monty's contract, right? Or get rid of him at the tail end of next season or before the deadline this year, depending on what the deals are. But I don't know whether or not I really want Jordan Binnington in the Canadiens lineup, and I want to hear if you do. Let's keep going here on the chat. Charles Normandin, hey coach, I think there might be a spot for you on Texier's cheerleading squad. Ha ha ha. Very funny. Listen, I give the devil his due when they do what they're expected, right? And Texier, 6 points in 2 games. I've given him flowers in both shows, right? There's no two ways about it. You're going to give him love, especially when the Canadiens are winning, right? But call it what it is. I'm not bashing Texier as a player. I'm not bashing his game. What I'm saying is that Texier, if he's going to be on the first line, where he is right now, he needs to be more of a player that fits the mold that Juraj Slafkovsky did. Because the first line is just missing that one piece. The guy who's able to separate man from puck along the boards and feed the puck over to Suzuki and Caulfield for scoring opportunities. That's part of the reason why their production came down a little bit. They don't have that guy feeding them the puck. They need that guy feeding them the puck. Texier is not that guy. As much as I love him, don't get me wrong. The fact that he came to Montreal, he's refound his game, and that he's happy, man, nobody wants to hear more about good stories in the game than I do. Guaranteed. But, the Canadiens need a guy who's physical along the boards. They can't have a cream puff out there. And a lot of times I see Texier just turning away from checks, and I hate when he plays with one hand on his stick. The one thing that pisses me off. Ask any one of the players I ever coached. One hand on your stick, you're doing laps. The only time I would ever let a player have one hand on his stick is he was trying to accelerate to the neutral zone with the puck on his stick. That's the only time. And even then, keep 2 hands on your stick. You have better control, right? I hate it when he pokes at the puck with that, one hand on his stick. Get in there. Get your nose dirty. That's what I want from hockey players, and that's why I get on him. But as far as the way he's played lately, there's no way I'm not on his bandwagon. Trust me. Terry, Detroit's rebuild started 2 or 3 years before ours. Habs so ahead in theirs. We're younger as well. That's very true. But here's the thing about Detroit's rebuild. There was a lot to clean up in Detroit. Whereas in Montreal, everything had already gone to hell, right? You had Shea Weber that couldn't play anymore. Carey Price was on his last leg, literally. And, a lot of the talent was gone from the Canadiens. So the rebuild happened relatively quickly for Montreal in that sense. If you remember, when Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon came in, the first thing they did is they got rid of assets to pick up draft picks. And I don't think that the Ilitch family was willing to do that to sacrifice the game on the ice. And they kind of handcuffed Steve Yzerman to start. But the Montreal Canadiens rebuild has actually served as an example to a lot of teams out there, whether they rebuild or they retool, right? It's served as a blueprint for how teams should be restructured. And here's the fun part about all this that a lot of people tend to forget. Guys that have come through the junior ranks and have made their way to the NHL as executives, right? And there's not very many of them because obviously it's a boys' club. But just like players, general managers need to develop. And if there's one thing about the junior ranks that is fantastic as far as executives are concerned, and specifically general managers, is that there's always a 4-year cycle with a team where for a year or two, they always struggle in junior because they need to rebuild what they had before. Older players leave, younger players come in. And that cycle really pushes them to, it's a mini rebuild, a 4-year cycle every 4 years. Guys are in and out, and the general managers learn to adapt to that. So if that's the case, and you've got a general manager at the National Hockey League that has done that rebuild at the junior level and has cycled guys in and out every 4 years, don't you think he's able to do that long term and has the knowledge to be able to do it long term and knows what it takes? So that if his rebuild isn't 4 years and it's 6, he'll have more time to actually build a perennial contender. I think they can. And so, yeah, Detroit started their rebuild earlier. But that being said, they also weren't given carte blanche like Jeff Molson gave to Gorton and Hughes. When Jeff Gorton was hired by the Molsons, right, it was like, Mr. Gorton, come in. I'm giving you a blank canvas. Rebuild my team. Gorton took what he had. I need a general manager. I'm going to get a general manager that understands the players, that understands what players need. Because if he does that, then when he negotiates contracts and he tries to go out and get players, he'll know what points to hit. I'm going to hire Kent Hughes, my friend. Kent Hughes gets in, and what does he do? He hires 2 of his former clients to come in. He hires Vincent Lecavalier. He hires Marty St. Louis. And while everybody, still to this day, a lot of people, oh, the Bantam coach, oh, this. You know that Marty St. Louis, again, for the 2nd straight year, is in conversations to win the Jack Adams Trophy? The Montreal Canadiens right now are number 1 in the Atlantic Division. Who would have thought that would have happened after last season they got in as a wild card on the last game of the season? Think hard before you answer that question. And don't come back to me like Marty St. Louis is a Bantam coach. That ship has sailed. He's been behind the bench of the Canadiens since the middle of 2021, excuse me. Stop. It's done. He's an NHL coach. Move on. What is Caulfield's line of what is Caulfield's line of being good tomorrow? Is it chances or scoring goals? Because that's what I think is coming to this team, that the team is much more efficient elsewhere than snipers like him. I'm trying to get the gist of your question, no channel, so don't get offended here. But if I'm understanding what you're saying, the thing about Caulfield's game is right now, he does it all, okay? He's not just a sniper anymore. He's feeding pucks to his line mates. He's back in the zone defensively. We saw it towards the tail end of last year where he started getting back into the defensive zone a lot more often. And when you play a 200-foot game, you tend to have less scoring chances, right? He is an elite sniper, okay? He's got elite level hands, and his shot, as you saw last night, or was it last night or was it against Calgary? It was against Calgary. The shot that he took in the 3rd period that ripped over the shoulder of Dustin Wolf, sorry, that's an elite level shot. I don't care if it was fluttering or not. The ability to pick that corner, not a lot of players can do that from that distance. So the problem with Cole Caulfield is, as I mentioned, he doesn't have a physical guy on the wing to be able to dig pucks out of corners or in behind the net. They need a big guy. They can't have, like, Texier is fine right now, and he's not a small guy per se, but he's not overly physical. They need a guy that can get in there and muck it up. That's why I suggested putting Josh Anderson on that line. It wasn't because Texier was unproductive, because he has the strong points. But when it comes to the line as a whole, Suzuki and Caulfield are playmakers that can score goals. You don't need another playmaker. 2 is fine. You need a guy that can get in there and muck it up. So why not go out there and send in, a Josh Anderson to get in there with speed, dig the puck out. I'm not asking Anderson to score goals. I'm asking Anderson to go in, get the puck, be physical along the boards, and feed the puck to Caulfield and Suzuki. Pretty simple, right? Live shows make me dry in the throat. Let's keep going here. Joe Luna. The youngsters are fun to watch. I hope we don't get older. The best thing that happened from the Habs last year is Savard, Armia, and Dvorak gone. Slow and inconsistent players we don't need. I could say that about Savard because, as people know, I wasn't a big fan of David Savard, especially in the tail end of the season last year, and his stupid flip pass out of our own zone. Hated that play. But when it comes to Armia and Dvorak, when you look at Dvorak's use in the Philadelphia Flyers, and the Flyers just re-signed him long-term for 5 years, I think it's 5.5 mil or somewhere around that. The thing about Dvorak is he's a guy that wins faceoffs. Those guys come at a premium. So whether he's young or old, the fact that he was winning faceoffs really important. Now, granted, we got Danault, same price as Dvorak, but Dvorak has a little bit more of an offensive upside than Danault. And then when you talk about Yoel Armia, keep in mind that while Armia wasn't out there to score goals, he was really effective killing penalties and playing on a checking line. All those guys bring value. It's not all about goals, assists, and points when it comes to the game of hockey. You have guys that produce, you have guys that energize. Armia, while he lumbered up the ice, number one, was never slow. Okay, he could stick handle in a phone booth, and he was really effective along the boards and maintaining puck possession and creating scoring opportunities, especially on the third line. And he's a guy that could fill in on the top two lines if you needed somebody. The fact that Armia was so good on the boards, he'd be a candidate to be out there along with Suzuki and Caulfield. I know that's a hot take, and I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, no, he's not fast enough. Just the fact that he could get up the ice and be physical along the boards would be something that I would look at possibly putting Armia up there. But I'd prefer Anderson nonetheless. But Savard, yeah, I absolutely agree, Joe. Yeah, there's no way I would have wanted him. Our power play, this is from Ben 9998. Our power play has been struggling because teams have caught on. Watch, they close in on Hudson, our QB, immediately. We're kept on the periphery. Need to start wiring clappers and driving the net. While I agree with that, Ben, there's something else that we need to do on the power play, and we don't do it often enough. But when we do, it's really, really productive. And that is shots from the bumper. That's the area in the slot in the middle of the box, right? You've always got that one man that's in there. And the puck has to move from the point to the half wall to the bumper. Sometimes you can go down to the goal line and up to the bumper as well. We've seen that from the Canadiens as well. They don't do it often enough. And I really can't pinpoint the reasoning behind it. It's not because of the way teams are covering, because, as you mentioned, the Canadiens tend to keep the puck on the periphery. Most teams do because it's the easiest place to be able to move it around on the power play. But oftentimes you got to be able to create those chances from the slot, and those high danger chances that the Canadiens generate ad nauseum at 5-on-5, they can be generated in the slot from the bumper on the power play as well. For some reason, though, the Canadiens just don't do it. And whether it's because the guy in the bumper doesn't slide up to avoid being in line with a defender, or slide down for that matter, or whether it's because when the pucks go below the goal line, automatically, when you take a look at Caulfield as an example, when he's below the goal line with the puck, he's looking to get it right back to Suzuki. When you've got somebody like Slafkovsky sitting in the bumper, and we saw Slafkovsky score from the bumper a few games ago, but we don't do it often enough. They know how to do it. They know the options there. They just don't execute. The reasoning behind it, it's tough to say because the opportunities are there. When I watch the power play, I see the opening, I see the opportunity. They just don't do it. And I don't know why. It's not a coaching thing, again, right? If it was a coaching thing, the bumper player wouldn't be there. Put that into your pipe and smoke it. So get away from the coaching thing. It's not a coaching thing. It's a play selection thing by the players that are on the ice, the 5 guys, right? But they don't. So what's the reason behind it? Who knows? At the end of the day, the unit's got to talk to each other. Marty's got to tell them, you know what? You really have to start looking at the bumper more often than not, because obviously it's not working. Now, as we continue down the chat, No Channel, can you tell me what you mean by how we format the PP? Because if I'm getting the actual thing, you format the PP. Right now, we play a hybrid between a 1-3-1 and an overflow. An overload. I'm losing my mind here. The 1-3-1 is conventionally what the power play formation that has the guy in the bumper, right? You've got a guy below the goal line, two guys on the flanks, one guy at the point, one guy in the bumper. That's your 1-3-1. Your overload has two guys near the point, two guys off to the side, and somebody at the net front. There's no guy below the goal line on an overload. And an overload uses only half the ice, not the full sheet. An overload moves side to side as a unit so that they force the box to move. In forcing the box to move, you end up opening up the back door. Another play the Canadians have used quite often lately. So that hybrid power play, it also keeps the opposition on their toes. And again, well, I said the Canadians have not been executing lately. You know, it is what it is, right? Not much more you can do about that. The puck will eventually start going in again because they're getting good quality chances. Terry, I heard you mention the Hawkesbury Hawks. I grew up in Pembroke and played some games for the hometown Lumber Kings back in the 80s. Oh boy, yeah. You're reminding me of the good old days in the CCHL where for 10 years I was the play-by-play voice of the Hawks, and I had my say when it came to coaching and player development as well. Been to Pembroke a lot. Actually, if you grew up in Pembroke back in the 80s, I'm going to say something and you're going to laugh. And you got to answer in the chat if you remember. But there was a place called The Mix that had a bar downstairs and a discotheque, right? Owned by the Barretos family. They're friends of mine. And I know George passed away a few years ago. And the restaurant's gone. But that place, I even came down, I think it was in 91, for a Pee Wee baseball tournament as a chaperone. There's a mistake to make. Make me a chaperone on a Pee Wee baseball team. We ended up taking a kid, no word of a lie here. And I hope the cops don't come after me for this. We ended up taking a kid because we were in the bar, and of course the Pee Wee guys were all underage. We took the kid and we stuffed him in an air vent because he was so small he shouldn't have been in there. And the cops came in to take a look and see what was going on. So we took the kid and we stuffed him in the vent. Kid's name was Billy. I think my best friend Tasso would remember. And we were laughing because the cops were walking around looking at everybody, right? And of course at the time, I think I was 21. I just barely started looking of age with facial hair and shit, right? So we stuffed Billy in the vent and we waited for them to walk away, and we were laughing the entire time. So, Pembroke brings back a lot of good memories. And of course, you got my boy Jeff out there doing that broadcasting for the Pembroke Lumber Kings in Pembroke. So, yeah, a lot of good memories. Thanks for the mention, man. That's awesome. Let's see. I'm a big fan. Terry says again, he's a big fan of getting Tuck from Buffalo to play on the first line. You need the physical support for the stretch and playoffs. Not saying it'll happen, but it would be a great get. I don't disagree. But here's the thing about all the Alex Tuck rumors, as it were. Tuck's not going anywhere, okay? A guy like Jarmo Kekalainen, who's smart enough to recognize talent, right? He's been around the National Hockey League for a very long time, is not going to move Alex Tuck from Buffalo. There's no way. I mean, even Tage Thompson. No. So let's call it what it is, okay? If you want a guy like Alex Tuck, be patient. Tyler Thorpe is exactly the same type of player as Alex Tuck. He's physical. He can bring it offensively. I don't see why we need to go out and go get Alex Tuck when you've got a guy coming up from the minors, right? Will he be ready next year, the year after that? Well, the last couple of development camps, he looks really good. And got to say that, like, in the American Hockey League, he's done relatively well this year. We'll see how it goes next year and whether or not he can find himself a spot on the team. We'll see. But I like what Tyler Thorpe is bringing to the table. We'll see what happens. But Tuck and Tage Thompson are going to be the cornerstones of the Buffalo rebuild, as it were, right? Because Kekalainen's got a lot of work in Buffalo. Buffalo's got a good team. They just need to get some additional pieces. And Tage Thompson and Alex Tuck are going to be part of that resurgence of the Buffalo Sabres. Mark my words. Ben. The Habs can literally solve all their problems internally. Look at their prospect pool. Look how we're playing with a full line of some of our players out. Coleman is a bonehead move. I'm glad you agree. I'm not a Coleman fan by any stretch. No channel, no on Coleman. Kapanen is R2C. Yes. And you know what? There's going to be a battle for 2C next year, and it's going to be interesting to see. Because Michael Hage will be on this team next year. Okay? I don't foresee him going to the American Hockey League. He's too good. If the Canadiens do send him to the American Hockey League, it's because he had a bad camp. But in my mind, Hage is with the Canadiens next year. If that's the case, does that push Kapanen down to the third line center position? There's another interesting question. Because Kapanen plays both sides of the puck, offensively and defensively, where we know that Michael Hage isn't really as good defensively as somebody like Kapanen. So putting Kapanen on the third line, allowing him to play penalty kill minutes, that could work. But right now, looking at him as it is, we don't have to go out and get a second line center. We have him. And I know that's the point that you're getting to here, Ace, and I agree wholeheartedly. I like this one. Blais is Coleman light at a quarter of the price. Attaboy. Somebody recognizes that. I want to grind our gear in the next 2 months. It's time to build chemistry and test things. There's no chemistry to build, man. They're testing things now, which is fine, right? And you see it on the power play, right? As we mentioned, the power play not really scoring, but they're trying different things, right? Different looks. When you see guys like Lane Hudson clap a shot from the power play, it's like, and that's the one thing that's missing from the power play, right? Is that big booming shot that we've all used to have, whether it was Subban, Vladimir Malahov, Sheldon Surrey, Shea Weber, to name a few. That shot was always important on the power play. Not so much anymore in the National Hockey League, because given the speed of puck pressure, that big shot from the blue line isn't really something that people use. Now it's from the flanks. In fact, it's always been from the flanks, really. But at the end of the day, that's where it's from. But, it's just, you're always testing everything. But the important part when you're testing stuff is to make sure that you maintain your energy level and your consistency. Keep your goals in mind. The Canadiens want to finish in the top 3 of the division this year, right? That's where they are right now. That's where they want to stay. They don't want to be in the mix this year, right? For lack of a better way of saying it. So let's continue doing what we're doing. Let guys find their comfort zone, their niche, where they can set up, where they can score from, where they have the most success. It's fine. Find it now. Because in the playoffs, that's not the time to find it. That's my joke, Ben. The doctor joke, I came up with that. Go back and take a look at one of my shows. I put it into one of the thumbnails and somebody gave me shit for it. Let's keep going here. Habs are small and soft. That comes from Wade. Caps rolled over them. Need size and attitude to advance. You know what? The Capitals didn't roll all over them physically. Sure, Tom Wilson was a big part of that series because he got under the Canadiens' skin. We saw that with the fight in the bench, right? But to say that they physically manhandled the Canadiens, that's not what happened. Did the Canadiens run out of energy? Yeah, and we could see that going into the playoffs, which is the reason why the Canadiens want to be at the top of the division as opposed to near the wild card fighting for their one of the last playoff spot late in the season. You lose a lot of that energy. You can't rest key players when you're going into the playoffs and you haven't clinched. The Canadiens want to clinch a spot. They want to be able to have a week, maybe 2, to be able to get guys out of the lineup, let them rest a little bit, put a younger guy in, whatever the case is. It doesn't really matter. That's the thing that's missing here from Montreal. It's not so much that Washington beat the crap out of them. It's not like we played the Flyers from the 1970s or that we played a series versus the Quebec Nordiques from the 1980s. Okay? What happened here is that the Canadiens came into a series versus a better team, right? We have to admit that. Washington at the top of the division, and they were out of gas. The Canadiens had nothing left in the tank, much like the 2021 Cup run, where they did everything right, but they played one extra series in 3 games in that year in the preliminary round. If they would have been able to get a bye in that preliminary round and start their playoffs in the first round like everybody else, they may very well have had enough energy to contend for the Cup versus Tampa. But they had nothing left, just like last season. A team that clinches their playoff spot and has time to rest a little bit as the season ends, they'll be a hell of a lot more energetic. Not to mention the Canadiens will get a better matchup versus a team that's at the lower end of the spectrum instead of them being at the lower end of the spectrum. So put that all into perspective here, right? When you're talking about the Habs are Saul and Smoft. Saul and Smoft. You heard me say that, right? Small and soft. They're not small and soft, okay? They're small. They're young, but they're not soft. They are a tough little team. But that toughness, that fades over long stretches of time. And this season, for every team in the National Hockey League, the fact that the season is so condensed and the schedule is so condensed, right now everybody's looking to rest players. There's not a single team that isn't looking to rest players. If the ideal thing would be not to have too many players go to the Olympics. Canadians have 4, right? You've got Texier, you've got Suzuki, you've got Kapanen. Who am I missing? And Slavkovsky. 4. Okay? That's all. And they may very well not get a lot of rest, but the 2 weeks at the Olympics is not the condensed schedule of the National Hockey League. They'll get a little bit of a break, even when they're there. So that 2-week break is going to be the period where everybody gets healthy and gets ready for the stretch run. Because March is another condensed schedule for every team in the league. So we'll see how that works out. But the Canadiens, after that 2-week period, just like last year after the Four Nations Cup, they were a hell of a team coming out of that tournament because everybody got to rest. We'll see what happens this year after the Olympics. But it's not because they're small and soft. If they stay within the top 3 of the division, they'll be in better shape. I guarantee you that. I like this one. I just lost it. Can you believe that? Where is that comment? I can't believe I lost it. Where did you go? Team identity. We're the freaking Montreal Canadiens. Now watch this replay. Gotta love that one. Attaboy, channel. Let's keep going down here. Apache Nation RDR2. Do you think Reinbacher is ready for a shot? I thought Reinbacher was ready for a shot last year. But the knee injury early on and then going back to the American Hockey League, that kind of put a damper on that. Do I think he's ready for the NHL? I want to see him finish the season at the American Hockey League level. But yeah, I think he's ready. Next season, guaranteed he's going to be on this roster. And honestly, the odd man out for me, Jaden Struble. To be fair, right? He hasn't played very well. And if he doesn't watch what he's doing, Struble may very well get dealt by the Canadiens to make room for Reinbacher. But we'll see what happens. But I do think Reinbacher is ready right now. There's just no room for him on the blue line. We got the Monty and Dobis stuff. Marty will be the coach to win the D-man thing. I don't even know what you mean by that. Marty, great player, great coach. High hockey IQ. Yes, I agree, Terry. There's a lot of people out there that still, when the Canadiens do falter, though, their fallback is always the fact that he used to coach Bantam. You know, funny story with Marty. When I was running my D-skate camps in Toronto, I actually ran into him at the Delta Hotel in Mississauga. His kids were there for a hockey tournament. He was sitting at the bar. I was sitting at a table with my kids having a dinner. And I saw him there, and I sent, because I had his email address, I sent him an email and said, hey, you don't look up when you're sitting at the bar? And he got up and he walked over, right? Introduced himself to the kids. We took a picture together. He talked about, at the time, I was still working for the Hawkesbury Hawks. Wink, wink, Terry. And so he asked about the Hawks because he himself was a former Hawk. He also talked about the camp. We talked about his kids' hockey tournament and everything. And, he also talked about what was going on for him personally at that time, right? And the big thing for him at that time, prior to him joining the Montreal Canadiens, is the fact that he was being dad, right? And when he came to the National Hockey League, basically the way I looked at it is that people were criticizing him for being a father because he was coaching his kids' teams. Think for a minute when you spend the better part of 20 years away from your family, working almost 200, 250 days a year away from home, okay? You're on the road, you're playing games, you're at the rink at practice, your kids are growing up and you're barely there, right? And Marty, when he retired, decided, you know what? I'm going to be dad. I want to be there. And he was for his kids. And then, he gets the job at the NHL level, and people forget too that he worked with the Columbus Blue Jackets as a power play consultant for a short period of time under John Tortorella. So he comes to Montreal and everybody's like, oh, you hired a Pee Wee coach. I hate to tell you this, guys, but every guy behind that NHL bench once upon a time was a Pee Wee coach. And they didn't stay in Pee Wee. They moved up the ladder. Granted, because of who he was, Marty went from Pee Wee to the National Hockey League. But are you really disappointed in what he brought to the table? What he's been able to do? Keep in mind, he got a really shitty team when he came to Montreal. And look what he's done with them since. Enough said there, right? Oops, I brought it back for some reason. There it is. Terry, that makes LOL. Great story. Too funny, coach. Yeah, that was me in my 20s. Unfortunately, I'm 53 now, going to be 54 next month, and I'm not as funny as I used to be. I thought Dobish was going to the Olympics. I honestly thought so too. I'm not sure that he is. Hang on. I'm going to take a look, okay? Because I wasn't sure. I know he was in the running because we had talked about it with one of our other listeners, Roman, out in the Czech Republic. He does not call it Czechia. Let's take a look here. Where are the goalies? Of course, they're last on the list, right? When you go down these things. So the goalies are Dostal, Vamelka, and Vladar. So Dobish was on the outside looking in the whole time, and that's where he ended up. It's unfortunate because he played well enough early on in the season to get consideration, but then the whole debacle, I think, kind of derailed everything when it came to his Olympic consideration. And yeah, to end the show, here's the comment of all comments. Marty will be the coach to win the damn thing. I trust he'll be the coach to win the cup. Stupid autocorrect. Yeah, don't worry about the autocorrect, No Channel. We get it. Marty is definitely going to be there. I'm not doing a live stream tomorrow on No Channel because I only do it once a week. And you see, I'm still getting used to running live shows, as the beginning of this one showed you, right? But, we're getting there slowly but surely. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Of course, I even forgot to change the background, right? So that goes to show you, duh. But glad we got through another live show. I will be let me speak English. We will be doing a post-game podcast after the Red Wings Canadiens game tomorrow. And of course, we'll do a show Sunday like we always do in advance of Monday's game versus the Vancouver Canucks. But thanks for joining us live. Guys, another thing is that the super chat is open. So if you guys want to drop a dime or two for a new microphone, apparently, do whatever you want. And of course, for those of you joining us, always make sure Joe Luna's playing the violin. Beautiful. And for those of you joining us, as always, please make sure that you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and of course, make sure that you hit the notification bell for all the latest and greatest from PuckTalk Montreal. Thanks for joining us live. Had a blast. See you on tomorrow night's podcast.